Welcome to Talking with Yourself, a podcast designed as a place to learn new things, talk about navigating the world, dealing with mental health, and just life in general. I'm your host, Sam Preston, and thank you so much for being here. Now, let's get into it. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode. Actually, one of my first solo episodes in a while. I don't know if any of you remember, but the very first episode I put out on eating disorders, I said that I could do an entire episode on books. So I figured since we're still pretty new to January, 2024 is not that far behind us. I thought I'd just talk about some of my favorite reads from 2024, why I love them so much, and maybe give you guys a few book recommendations, a few fun things to read for the new year. I read probably almost 20 books. When I say almost, I mean like 19 books halfway through my 20th when the new year hit. We're going to call it 20 just for the sake of my reading goal. So I read 20 books, including finally reading Twilight, which I, like, believe it or not, have not read up until that point. I read all of them in the span of like 2 weeks. I was addicted. It was bad, but I got through them all. I loved them. I'm going to be honest, they were good. A lot of people shit on the movies. I did end up watching the movies after that. I get it, especially right after reading the book, because most of the book happens in Bella's head. And it's like her thoughts and just her thought process. And how do you put that into a movie? It's hard. They did their best. I also read a bunch of R.L. Stine books. Like, I went through a phase of just reading those books for fun. And for those of you who don't know, R.L. Stine is kind of like a horror author, but he's more so geared to younger generations. Either way, I probably got through like 6 or 7 of them within a few weeks, like the span of like 2, 3 weeks, because they're very quick reads. I could do one in like a sitting. It's kind of almost embarrassing to say considering like the audience they're meant for, but some of the plot twists actually surprised me. And I may or may not have had a nightmare based off one of the books. In my defense, though, I would go through like 2 of those books in one sitting right before I fall asleep. So it's the only thing that's on my mind. And then, of course, because it's all I'm thinking about before I'm going to sleep, it shows up in my dreams. But it kind of did get to the point where I had read so many of them that I could pretty much pick up on the plot twist almost immediately. So, just for the sake of like them becoming more fun again, that makes sense. I just kind of put them down for a bit and like I'll come back to the rest that I own later when I don't really remember how the plots went and who to look at for suspects. You know, when you just like you read so much of a certain author, you pick up on their writing style, and it's kind of hard not to be surprised with where they take the books. That's pretty much what happened. So I had to put them down for a bit, but they were fun reads. Well, I did them. Yeah. Okay, enough about those books. I really want to get into my top 5 of the year, I'd say. First one, The Silent Patient. I mentioned this in my first episode, and I want to say it was probably one of my favorite books to come out of the year, or at least was in my top 2, top 3. Very obviously, it's in my top 5. It was actually recommended to me by a friend, which, funny enough, up until 2024, I had not had a lot of friends recommend me books. For some reason, like the past year is when every one of my friends started saying, you should read this and you should read this and you should read this. And so my like TBR list is insanely huge. And I blame my friends. But either way, it was recommended to me by a friend, and my parents bought it for me as a Christmas present when I started talking about it. I went through that book in maybe 2 days. It's not a short book either. Like, it's a good read, but I got through that thing. I was addicted to that thing for 2 straight days. It's a psychological thriller about a woman who murders her husband and then just goes silent. And it follows this criminal psychotherapist who attempts to get her to talk and tries to kind of unravel the mystery of, did she do it? Why did she do it? Why is she not talking? I'll do my best to avoid spoilers. This kind of goes for all the books I'm talking about. Like, I'll do my best to avoid spoilers so that way if you guys want to read them, you can still have the joy of bouncing back and forth every 5 pages of who you think did it, if you think she did it, if you think someone else did it, why, all this stuff. But like, the book literally had me on the edge of my seat trying to figure out this mystery. And I don't read a lot of mystery novels. For some reason, this past year, I keep wanting to say this year. This past year was when I got into a few more of the murder mystery type of novels. But I might just be terrible at them. I don't know. But I literally could not figure it out until the very end. Granted, I went into this book with almost zero expectations. Like I said, up until 2024, I hadn't read a lot of mystery type novels. So I went into this with pretty much zero expectations, except for a recommendation from a friend who said she'd think I'd really like it. And I ended up loving it. So honestly, maybe if you want to read the book, skip this little review. I feel like sometimes no expectations just make the book that much better because you have no clue what to expect. You don't know what's going to happen. So, a little bit of a deeper summary. Like I said, it follows a woman. Her name's Alicia. She is a famous painter who one day supposedly kills her husband and then goes silent, never speaks a word again. She's then admitted to a mental care facility where, for the next, I think it's like 6 years or something like that, she doesn't speak. And then we meet Theo, who is the criminal psychotherapist, and he fully uproots and moves his job to this like failing facility. Like, it's going under, it's not going to last. He essentially uproots his entire job to this facility just to work specifically with Alicia. And so the story mostly follows his point of view, but we do get like little snippets from Alicia's diary of her life before the murder happens. And her, to me, at least when I was reading it, her diary entries did not seem like a girl who would murder someone, let alone her own husband. But I guess sometimes with people, you never know. It's also a bit of a slow burn. Like, it takes obviously a while to get to who done it. Like, you don't find it till the end. But just in terms of things happening and pieces unraveling, it's a very slow burn. So if you're impatient, this book is not for you. I personally loved like the buildup of anticipation, how much it keeps you guessing, just the entire time of me being like, when are they going to reveal this? When are they going to reveal this? I thought they said this, and I can't, I'm gonna spiral. They also like do a pretty good job, the author, of bringing up just little like tidbits that I didn't even pay much attention to until after I finished the book, and I kind of did my own little research and went through other people's reviews to see their thoughts and all these things. But they reference pretty early on, in the form of one of Alicia's paintings, an old Greek play. And I'm so sorry if I butcher this, but an old Greek play called Alcestis. I am not too versed in Greek mythology and anything like that. So if some of this is wrong, I'm sorry. This is just what I found on my own little research. But Alcestis is a play about a woman who essentially chooses to die in her husband's place and is then brought back from the dead and does not speak. And I'm pretty sure it's presumed she doesn't speak because of betrayal and out of anger, which for those who have read the book, there's a little bit of a deeper meaning to that portion. And in all honesty, this was probably one of my first reads of the year. I read this early on, so I don't remember a lot of specifics. I'm just kind of mostly going off my memory here. But a big theme of the book is tragedy. And I mean, a lot of the book revolves around this painting of Alcestis, which is known as a Greek tragedy. But like it also explores themes of childhood trauma, betrayal, deception, like relationships, things like that. And I think part of what's interesting outside of the mystery of what actually happened is there's this therapy aspect to it, in where like it presents a challenge. Most forms of therapy revolve around talking about things and talking with the therapist. And how do you have a session with somebody who doesn't talk? Anyways, it's a really interesting book. And honestly, I think if it was more fresh in my mind, I have a lot more insights to go through. But also, for the sake of avoiding spoilers, I will just stop right here and move on. And all I have to say is please go read it. Book number 2. Please don't make fun of me for this. Look Out for the Little Guy. Yes, I am aware it's a Marvel book. And I will say I only got it because I'm a big Marvel fan. Please don't make fun of me for this being in my top 5, okay? I got this book and I expected it to be just this fun and silly little read. And funny enough, I actually got some advice and insight out of it. We're going to start off saying a special shout out to the Nat chapter. She is and forever will be my favorite character, and I'm just glad she got some form of recognition send off. As someone who was I cried a lot. As someone who was a little sad that we didn't get a proper Nat send off, this was probably as close as we were going to get. And oddly, I'm okay with it. They kind of did her justice in that chapter. Okay, I'm not going to get too far into that. I'm going to talk about the actual book, the book itself. I think it is the perfect blend of comedy and seriousness, having a mix of jokes and funny blurbs that just tie in well with Scott's character. And then some insightful life lessons that I'm not going to lie, I've actually carried with me since I read the book. Let me just give you a few of the quotes from the book without going too deep into it, because I want all of you to pick it up and read it for yourselves if you're able. But these are just some of the quotes that kind of stuck with me and that I love. To know how to be big, first you must remember what it's like to be small. A little friendly human interaction, even something as simple as a smile or a compliment on their funny t-shirt, is a way of saying, I see you and I don't take you for granted. Don't wait, because trust me, none of it will wait for you. And then this last one is probably one of my favorites, and I think this is the one that I've carried with me most and probably thought about most. We can spend our lives clinging to what we know, or we can grab as many memories as possible and move on to what's new and maybe even better ahead of us. There is a whole chapter in there about like connecting and communicating with people, one about building friendships, being yourself. It's just the fact that I picked up this book thinking it would be full of little quips and small mentions at Marvel adventures and a few little added behind the scene tidbits. And it was. Don't get me wrong, that's what it was. But it also just surprised me with how many life lessons they threw in there, and how, as I was reading it, I was actually absorbing things and learning things. I don't know. Maybe it's a weird book if you're not a Marvel fan. You might not get some of the references or events, and you might just be lost. You might not know who any of the characters are. Probably for the entire book, you're just thinking, who are these people? What's happening? All that. So maybe it's only a really good read if you've paid attention to Marvel movies and are a fan, but I'm still gonna recommend it in all honesty. Like, it's just the perfect, unexpected combination of taking like the comedy that you see in the Ant-Man movies and taking the comedy of Scott's character and mixing all of that in so it still feels true to that portion of Marvel. And then it also just kind of blends in these little life lessons where he writes a whole chapter to his, like, obviously, quote unquote, daughter and gives her a few life lessons. And that's where you get, like, don't waste your time. Things aren't going to wait for you. You have to go out and you have to get them, and all these things. Just read it for yourself. I loved it. I still go back through it every once in a while. I'm not going to lie. On to the third book, though, The Blue Castle. It is a bit of an older book. I honestly don't even know how I ended up with it, but I did really enjoy it. This one was written by Ella Montgomery, which I feel like you've probably heard of for the Anne of Green Gable books. It's set in, I want to say, like the 20s or 30s, and it follows a woman named Valency who essentially, in a nutshell, receives shocking news from her doctor, and she decides to rebel against her family and go off to explore places and have adventures and to essentially find her quote unquote blue castle, which is a place she often imagines as a sort of safe haven, like kind of a fairy tale sort of place where she can be who she truly wants. And I don't honestly know if it was meant to be a romance novel, but that's not really how I see it. I kind of see it as like a self discovery, finding yourself type of book. And again, like I said, I'll avoid as many spoilers as I can. But I honestly took the message of the book as it's not too late to start your life. Or in a way, there's no timeline to your life and things don't have to happen at a certain time or a certain age. In a nutshell, I took it as you're not behind in life. There's no such thing. Things happen to people at different times, and that's okay. Kind of as a takeaway, I'm just trying to say, for example, you don't have to graduate by a certain age. You don't have to fall in love at a certain age or get married or have children by a specific point in your life. Basically, I think I took way more from this book than I was supposed to. You can't blame me. I'm an English major, okay? I read something and it's just ingrained in me these past, like, however many years to just analyze it and think about it. And, like, it's just the way I am at this point. You got to take what you get. But beyond all the English major analyzing stuff, I think it was still a really entertaining book. And actually, a few little mysteries got revealed that added to the plot really well, I thought, that you kind of just don't expect. I mean, maybe now you're expecting them because I've said something, but again, I went into this book with zero expectations. I don't even remember buying it. I don't know if I was given the book as a gift. Like, I don't know. But I went into it with pretty much zero expectations. And I'm not usually a fan of older novels just because sometimes the language bothers me. Like, yes, I know I'm an English major, but I hate Shakespeare. I could never get a grasp on Shakespeare. And I find that's what it's like for a lot of older books that I pick up. I feel like I spend so much time trying to figure out what they're saying, and I don't actually end up enjoying the book because I'm so focused on that. Like, there's this book called Whose Body? I don't remember who the author is. And no offense, I'm sure it's a great book, but I remember picking it up and I just couldn't seem to get past the older language and actually enjoy it. But nevertheless, with Blue Castle, I didn't actually struggle with the way it was written, and I just kind of got lost in the book, which, little side note, is probably one of my favorite things about reading. It's just the ability to get into a good book and be in your own little world as you read. And maybe I'm crazy, but just have you ever read a book and you're so into it, you can practically see it playing out in your head, like a movie. And then you stop reading and you just kind of realize you're sitting in your bed in your house reading words off of a page, somehow imagining them. I don't know, just please tell me I'm not alone in this. Either way, it was a really good book, and just the characters' growth throughout it was amazing. And it was played out in a way that you know the character is growing and you know things with her are changing, But until you reach the end of the book and reflect on how she used to be, you kind of almost don't notice how big of a change she goes through. I'm going to move on before I spoil too much about it. I really want you guys to experience that one. Next one, this book is probably up there in my all-time favorites, right alongside The Silent Patient, and it's The Time Traveler's Wife. It was probably one of the last books I read in 2024 before I got busy with school, so it's more fresh in my mind than some of the other ones. And I did end up watching the movie after. While I enjoyed it, I definitely liked the book better. And I'm usually that kind of person anyway, who enjoys the book a lot more than she enjoys the movie. I will admit it had its weird moments, but overall the story and the book itself was really good. And I couldn't put it down for like 3 or 4 days until I'd finished it. I find that's a theme. I can tell when I really enjoy a book when I'm getting through it in like a couple days, just purely because of the fact I can't put it down and I'm so obsessed with it. The book follows a love story between characters Henry and Claire. Henry has a genetic disorder that essentially forces him to time travel randomly, so he has no control about where or when he goes or when this happens. The book pretty much follows their relationship as they fall in love and they learn to navigate their life together and kind of learn to navigate around his time traveling problem. Probably my only complaint about the book is the timelines at the start of each chapter were pretty hard to follow. So I kind of gave up on that part and just settled for knowing the general timeline in which things were happening. So instead of paying attention to each specific date, I just kind of put it in the back of my mind of, okay, this is when they're around this age, and this is when they're around this age, and this kind of happens here, instead of trying to like piece it all together in this one specific timeline. Although the fact that like I did that didn't even make it hard to follow, I think I still managed pretty well. So realistically, if you're finding you're reading this book and you can't keep up with the timelines, don't stress it. They're apparently not super important. Okay, wait, I lied. I actually have a small second complaint because there were times where the relationship between the two seemed almost creepy to me. Just with the time traveling, there's some points where this 30-ish year old Henry is talking to like a 10-year-old Claire about their relationship, and she's like 13 and he's like 20 something, and she's like, kiss me, and I'm like, it's that part was weird. But if I look beyond that fact, then I have absolutely no complaints at all because I did still enjoy the book a lot and loved the plot. I kind of like to think in a funny, ironic way that the author was trying to say love is timeless and almost toy with the circle of life in a sense. And then also just kind of get across the message that things are going to happen and they happen for a reason. In the sense that maybe this is a small spoiler, I don't know. But Henry, when he goes back in time, he does try to change things. So when he travels to the past, there's a few times he tries to change things, and they still happen exactly as they're meant to. In a roundabout way, saying you can't change the past no matter how hard you try. Overall, I think it was a really well written book. And I liked that you got to watch them go through normal couple problems. And then there was obviously the added stress of Henry time traveling randomly and Claire learning how to deal with that and being left alone. I like that it still had that fun fiction aspect to it while also kind of tossing them into real problems that actual couples face. I don't know. I thought that was cool. Okay, for the last book I want to talk about, it's more so of an honorable mention to Anne of Green Gables. Classic book written by Ella Montgomery. I mentioned her earlier. Canadian author, love it. Such a good book. And I actually went to PEI a few years ago and visited the museum they have there, which was so cool. You get to walk the property and through a museum that talks about her and her work. And there's an Anne of Green Gables house that you can walk through. And it's just really cool. If you're ever in PEI, I absolutely recommend going to see it. although maybe aim for the summer because I went in spring and it was freezing. But that's actually where I got my copy of the book from. So they had a little gift shop there and they were selling the books for honestly surprisingly cheap. And I picked one up just thinking I'd get the first one, and I kind of regret not grabbing more. But it feels a bit funny to say that I actually shed a few tears at the end of the book, which, in all honesty, I can't remember myself ever doing. Granted, I may have before and just not remember, but who knows? Either way, I cried a little at the end of the book, and I think this was one that I got through within a couple days too. And I had just gotten so attached to the characters, so much so that I won't spoil it. Something happened, and I just ended up crying for a minute or two. We're not going to judge me for that. I definitely want to find the other books for this to read in the future because I've really only made it through the first one. And I'm assuming if I loved the first one so much, I'm absolutely going to love the other ones. So when I get those and I read through those, maybe I'll give you guys another review on the rest of them. Okay, now that I've gone through some of my favorite books of the past year, I want to talk about a few of the ones I am looking forward to reading in 2025. I have a huge amount of books. Like they are stacked on my floor. I don't even have room on my bookshelf for them at this point. There's so many of them that I've bought and haven't read over the years. So, my goal for this year is to avoid buying more books unless like they're on sale or some sort of good deal I can't pass up. But essentially to avoid buying new books and just going through as many of the ones I own as I possibly can. And honestly, maybe I'll go through enough of them that I'll have an even longer book review episode next year, but we'll see. I'm not going to get ahead of myself. I've got a few biographies that I really want to read. There's a Becky Lynch one, which, for those of you who don't know, she's a famous WWE wrestler and probably one of my favorite wrestlers. I'm a wrestling fan, in case you didn't get that. But I got her book as a Christmas present last year, not even this past Christmas. And I started reading it and then just never got through to finishing it. So maybe I'll restart it, see how quickly I can get through that one. Another one is Ronda Rousey's second book. Again, UFC fighter, wrestler. I think she owns a farm now. I don't know. I read her first book like a year or two ago and finished it literally the same day. Again, I get a lot of books as Christmas presents, okay? I think it was definitely a Christmas present. And before the clock even struck midnight that night, I was already done it. My entire reading genre is so all over the place, in case you couldn't tell, just purely based off my review. But I'll read almost anything that sounds interesting. So, some of the ones I'm looking forward to just randomly off my shelf are The Sky is Everywhere. And I think that was turned into like a show or a movie or something. I obviously haven't seen that yet, but maybe I'll watch it after reading the book. I feel like if I can help it, I never like watching the movie or the show before reading the book because to me that almost kind of ruins it. When I'm reading something, I like to imagine the characters as I think they are, and I like to imagine scenes how I think they're playing out and what they look like. And I feel like when you watch an adaptation, you get that image in your head, and it's so hard to be creative and come up with your own as you're reading the book. But okay, I'm gonna get like off track here. Moral of the story, I haven't seen it yet. But if it is bad, please just someone tell me so I can prepare myself. I just need to know what to expect. There's another book I picked up at a thrift store called Dear Daughter, and it's a mystery novel that I remember reading the summary of and being really interested in. Speaking of thrift stores, over the past year or two, I've been going to any thrift store that I can find and collecting as many of the Hardy Boy books as possible. I haven't amassed like a huge collection. I want to say I have maybe like just over 10 of them, and there's like 40 or 50 of them. But it's definitely growing, and it's growing pretty fast for only looking in thrift stores. Maybe I'll try and get through some of those this year. The reason I'm doing this is I loved Nancy Drew books growing up, and I remember reading a few of the Hardy Boys crossovers that they had and loving them. Plus, I just love the look of the books that I've been collecting. So I've just kind of taken to getting as many of them as I can so that I can read them all in order, of course, which I think might actually make this funny because I don't think I found the first one yet. So I kind of have to make a few exceptions to my no buying new books rule so that I can actually read these books in order. But those books are my exceptions. No matter what I say to, I'm not buying new books. If I find one of those in a thrift store that I don't have yet, I will immediately buy it, no questions. There's also a really cute edition of Pride and Prejudice that I have. It was so pretty, I couldn't pass it up. It's this cute, like almost felt type of texture with just really pretty colors and really pretty design on the front. I don't even know how to explain it to you. Just I saw it and I immediately knew I had to buy it. I don't actually think I've ever read it, which feels funny enough. I feel like as an English major, I would have done it in a course, but I know I've seen the movie, so I guess I'm kind of going against what I said earlier about wanting to read the books before the movies. In all honesty, I barely remember the movie, so it's going to be like reading it for the first time. Okay, some other books that I've got that I won't go too deep into. I have The Woman in White, The Dead Zone, and that one's a Stephen King one. Grease, and yes, Grease, like the musical, like the book that the musical is based off of. I've got The Girl on the Train. I have so many that I could just go on for a good couple minutes listing all of the books that I have collected over the years and still have never managed to read, but it's fine. I'm not in school. I've got essentially a whole year to dedicate to getting through these. All in all, there is a whole stack of books that I've got to get through. I think my ideal goal would be 25 books for 2025, but I'm honestly just going to be happy if I do my best and I try to get through as many of the ones that I have as I can. And who knows, maybe I'll be back here in a year talking about some of the ones I just mentioned and what I liked about them. I know that this episode may not have been what a lot of people enjoyed, but for bookworms like me, I hope that you enjoyed some little book chit chats. Maybe I convinced you to pick up one of these books. Or maybe you're not a bookworm at all, and somehow you're still going to go out and you're going to buy something like The Silent Patient or The Time Traveler's Wife. Please do. And you know what? Once you read them, if you really got a rant about some things, send me a message. I will happily always talk about books. I'm more than happy to share other recommendations too, or please, please, please give me some of your favorite books. I know I said I was going to try and hold off on buying new books, but we all know that probably isn't going to last long. So if you possibly want to hear your favorite book on next year's review, then definitely send it to me and hopefully I'll get around to it. All right, we are hitting the end of the podcast, and you know what that means. Affirmation time, if that wasn't obvious by now. So this episode's affirmation is going to be, you are right where you need to be. You are perfect at this exact moment, exactly how you are. I will be back next week with another guest, so I hope you'll join me again. Thank you so much for listening to my little book rant, and know that no matter what stage of life you're at, that affirmation I just said will always be true. Till next time, my friends.